Okay, so Betfair graphs. How do you read a Betfair graph, and what do you need to bear in mind when forming an opinion through using one? Okay, so when you're looking at any Betfair graph, regardless of sport, there's always 3 key points to bear in mind. So quite simply, you've got price, time, and volume. Volume is just basically the amount of money matched at a specific price at that point in time, all crammed into one graph, and that is the Betfair graph. Now that's all well and good, but how do you actually make sense of what you actually see in a graph in front of you? So looking into the graph on the screen now, you can see there's grey bars along the bottom of the graph. Now they are the volume bars, so they line up with the amount of volume shown on the axis on the right. So for example, you can see the last big chunk of volume that was matched in one go, highlighted on the screen, was about £2,000, and that was at a price of around about 6 or 6.2 maybe, looking at this graph. So you can see at that point in time, which is the most current point in time when the graphs had a picture taken of it, £2,000 was matched at 6.0 or 6.2 thereabouts. The confusing part for most people comes when looking at time, because if you look at the bottom of that graph, you can actually see there's no actual units of time along that bottom axis. So it can be really quite variable, which becomes confusing understandably. So to highlight what I'm trying to say there, if you look at the left hand side of the graph, there's less than £500 match on a regular basis, and that would likely to have been this morning. So you could argue that that left hand side of the graph is almost irrelevant because there's not a lot of volume matched in the market at that point in time, so there's not so much data to actually go off. If you look at the right hand side of the graph, you can see that there's regularly larger amounts of money being matched and going into the market, so therefore that's a better true representation of the actual price of this specific runner. And that because there's no time axis there, that second half of the graph could have actually been 10 minutes, and the first half could have been 8 hours, and that's why it can give a little bit of a skewed view when you initially open up and look at a Betfair graph, particularly as somebody who's newer to Betfair trading. Okay, so now we actually understand what the graph looks like and how it operates, and sort of interpret it a bit better. Let's look at how you can actually use the graph to make some kind of opinion. Now in this case, it's not particularly full of clues, and also the thing that I should say, probably the most important thing, is in a horse race, for example, there's many other runners which will have an impact on this horse's price too. So you can't go, oh, this has happened on this graph, this horse is going to drift or steam. It just doesn't work like that. It can be, there can be a lot more clues because of things that are on the graph, but ultimately, if there's 10 other runners in the race and 9 of them are backed, it doesn't really matter what's happened on this graph, the price will drift. Okay, so the actual graph itself, how can we sort of spot some kind of clues? Now, if we bear in mind what I said about the volumes, we're just going to pretty much ignore the first half on the left there. There's no significant volume, it's not of real interest. And I'm going to take a look at the right. Now you can see that the price dips in a little bit, and then it's literally flatlined since then. So this price has been quite static, quite stagnant. There's been a fair amount of volume matched on this price. It looks as though maybe it's tried to drift out marginally more, although there is no real opinion based on this graph alone. The thing to remember is that when you look at the volume bars, you might get one big spike, and yes, one big spike can cause the price just to go into a tailspin if it happens, at the right point in time in conjunction with something else that's happening in the betting market elsewhere. However, generally, it's better to have lots of small bars in favour of your decision going in one direction if the price isn't drifting or steaming, than having one big spike. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket based on one big amount of money matched in the market, because it could be for any number of reasons. However, if you've got lots and lots of small to medium sized bets all going in favourably in one direction, i.e. the price is drifting and there's lots and lots of 200s, 500s, thousands matched, and it's going one way generally, then that can be a little bit more of a clue as to sort of trusting and using this graph more than basically what you're looking at right now, which is it's bounced up and down a little bit all over the place. There's been a couple of big spikes, a little bit of steady volume. However, the steady volume hasn't even really moved the price in either direction. So this graph doesn't really give a lot away. Or maybe it's just the fact that the price isn't really going to move. The price is just going to remain quite static. More money's going to be turned over. Yes, it may come in a little bit, it may go out a little bit, but generally it's just going to be a market that turns over more money and the price doesn't really move that much. Okay, so let's have a look at what actually happened then in the following, I think it was 3-4 minutes after taking the first snapshot. So you'll see the before and after. This is the before and this is the after. So you can see the previous £2,000 match along the bottom there, just to put this, relative to our previous snapshot. So beyond there, everything to the right is what happened in the final few minutes. And you can see that takes up a large chunk of the graph as well, because there was more money matched, as I said earlier, in that period of time. So what happened? Yep, there was a big spike that came in. There was a little bit more steady volume. The price did drift out, come back in a little. Overall though, it didn't actually move that much. So if you remember earlier when we were looking, it was like 6.62 the price, and the starting price was 6.6, 6.8. So that's Betfair Graphs.